Perfect. All right, awesome. Okay, so where we're going to kick it off tonight is at the very bottom of page 108. And the chapter that we're in is the chapter Two Wives. And this is the joke I was making last week. Please don't leave. Please don't leave. Stick it out. And see, when we're approaching this chapter, we might have some ideas about what's in this chapter. We might not be comfortable with what we've heard about this chapter, or we don't like the title Two Wives. And what I always suggest is we cross out the word wife and we write to those who stay, to those bound to the alcoholic, or those bound to the addict, to those untreated codependents, to those unhealed Al-Anons. That's who we're talking about. And so as we go through this chapter, I was saying this before, we're going to do a lot of step one review. Step one review happens as we go through, and we're also going to do some bouncing around the big book. So for those that know me, know I like to bounce around. So what we're going to start off is with the 4 different types of drinkers. And it's the very bottom of page 108. And it says the problem with which you struggle usually falls within one of 4 categories. Bottom of 108. So this is category 1. Your husband may be only a heavy drinker, a hard user, right? And it says his drinking may be constant, or it may be heavy only on special occasions or certain occasions. People are welcome. I'm glad you're here. We're top of page 109. See, that's what I mean. If you put things in chat, it'll grab my attention and we'll go on a tangent. Here for it. Absolutely. So his drinking may be constant, or it may be heavy only on certain occasions. Perhaps he spends too much money for liquor. It may be slowing him up mentally and physically, but he doesn't see it. So this is somebody who might not have a problem, but definitely does not think they have a problem. And that's important. See, when we look at the types of drinkers, we're going to see the progression of alcoholism. We're going to see us go from a hard drinker to a real alcoholic. And we're going to see us go from, yeah, he might be able to slow down and control, to absolutely hopeless. But also, what is important to see as we approach these 4 drinkers is their level of willingness. And what I always want to emphasize with type 1 is not willing. They're not interested. They're not open. So sometimes he is a source of embarrassment to you and his friends. He is positive that he can handle his liquor, that it does him no harm. The drinking is necessary in his line of business. He would probably be insulted if called an alcoholic. See, it's working for him. This person doesn't believe they have a problem. They're not open to a solution for a problem they don't think they have, and they might not have. Some will moderate or stop altogether, and some will not. Of those who keep on, a good number will become true alcoholics or true addicts, or whatever brings you to the study today, a true hopeless case after a while. Now, one of the things I want to point out is when I work with people, oftentimes we can get stuck in that idea of like, hey, wait a minute, that looked like me. I mean, that didn't look like me right now. It doesn't look like me before I came to the rooms. That doesn't look like me right before I have to have a sponsor, before I have to do these steps, before I'm hanging out on a Monday with this weird little redhead that's nattering on about how great Two Wives is. But that looked like me maybe 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. I could quit. I could have put it down. I could pick it up. Wait a minute. Maybe I'm not that bad. And what I want to do is I want to bounce around. Let's pop over to page 21, because I want to talk for a minute about the real alcoholic. So on page 109, what we're talking about is somebody who might just be a hard drinker, a heavy drinker. But it's saying that if they keep on, it's possible they'll continue to be a real alcoholic. Page 21, first full paragraph, where it says, what about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker. So I might start off as someone who can take it, leave it alone. Does nothing to me, does nothing for me. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. But at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. is my experience that once I start to drink, once I start to use, once I pick up that substance that's bringing me here, that I lose control, that allergy kicks off more often than not, and off I go, and I need more. And the more that I drink or the more that I use, the more that I need. See, I talk about it like I start drinking and I get thirstier. You know what I mean? And if you know what I mean, like, I got some bad news. You might be one of us. Because people that are not like me don't know what I mean. They're like, what do you mean you get thirstier? I was talking about how not once in my life have I sat down and polished off a 12-pack of Pepsi, in an evening. I've never done that. Never done that. Not once have I had, not once have I taken one Advil and then needed to finish off the bottle of pills. That's never happened to me. That's happened to me with some other pills, though. You know what I'm saying? And so when we're talking about whether or not I had control and choice before, it's, do I have control and choice now? Because now is what matters. And so even though I might have had periods in my life where I maybe had some control over the allergy or some ability to put it down and keep it down for a substantial period, what is my experience today? So going back to page 109, I might just be a hard drinker. That's who that guy is. Now let's go to alcoholic. Well, he's going to be an alcoholic. We're starting to see some alcoholism or some addiction, right? But number two, drinker number two. And so it says, your husband is showing lack of control, for he is unable to stay on the water wagon, even when he wants to. So this mirrors what we see that first question on page 44. If when we honestly want to, we find we cannot quit entirely. When I have honestly wanted to not drink, not pick up, when I've honestly said, that's it, I am done forever, has that had any effect? And if my experience is, no, I'm not able to stay sober, that's what it means to be on the water wagon. Like, it would be only drinking water. If my experience is I need to stay sober, but I'm not staying sober, it's a sign that I have a lack of choice. Or if you're writing in your book today, what you can write is you can make a little note that what we're talking about here today is the mental obsession. Oh, and there's a note in chat. Hold on. When I disappeared again and was confronted when I returned home, I used to explain it as I got a taste on. Yeah, I hear you. No, there is a thing that'll happen if you were to take me to a wine sampling. Don't take me to a wine sampling. But if you were to take me to a wine sampling and I was not in the position of neutrality, safe and protected, the mental obsession kicks off and off I go. I am going to shut down that wine sampling. You know what I'm not going to do? That with a cheese sampling. If you bring out a charcuterie board, I will enjoy it, but I will not ruin my life. Yes. And so, yeah, type 1 is considered a hard drinker, a heavy drinker, a potential alcoholic. But type 2 is where we're beginning to see the signs of alcoholism. See, type 1, it's saying sometimes he gets out of hand, but he doesn't think he has a problem. He doesn't think he believes he has a problem. But number 2, we're starting to see some of the real symptoms of alcoholism. That first symptom, what we're talking about there, is that I'm not able to choose whether I will drink or use or not. That's the first symptom. And then it says, he often gets entirely out of hand when drinking. What are we pointing to there? Well, we're pointing to that physical allergy, that lack of control, that once I start, I cannot control the amount that I take. Is my experience that I often get entirely out of hand when drinking or using. That it's not like how I cheese board, you know what I mean? It is how I burn it to the ground. I can't stop. And it says he admits that this is true. So there's a little glimmer of the awareness of the reality. There's a little glimmer of our willingness to do something about it. And says, but is positive he will do better. Now you can make a little note. If you're writing in your book, which I like to write in mine, you do what you want to do. You can make a little note that what he's trying to do is swear off. And I'm going to tie this together as we go through. We're going to have a look at the cycle of alcoholism, the cycle of addiction. as it's written on XXVII, and we're going to see how number 2 is beginning to go through this cycle. So it says he has begun to try with or without your cooperation various means of moderating. And when I'm trying to moderate my consumption, what I'm trying to do is to exert power over the physical allergy. And if it doesn't work, if I've tried to control, if I've done, like I'm going to drink water in between my drinks, or I'm going to stick to beer, or, I'm just going to switch to cocaine, or I'm going to switch to pot, or I'm going to switch to these substances, these ways to try to exert control. And that doesn't work. I've got the allergy. And then it says, of moderating, or, or pour it out in milk. Yeah. Milk couldn't hurt me. Also, the story of Jim putting the whiskey in the milk. What's our reaction? It's like, ew, gross. Whiskey and milk, that's disgusting. That's my thought. And then I forget drinks like Kahlua exist, or White Russians. Completely forget that that's a normal thing. Anywho, yeah. And so when it talks about various means of staying dry, what are we trying to do? We're swearing off, and we're trying to exert some power over the mental obsession. That mental obsession being that insane thought that I have that tells me this time will be different. I can do it again. Nobody will ever know. I'll go out for 3 days. I'll get it back together on Monday. If you're in Canada, it's a long weekend. I'll get it back together on Tuesday. You know what I mean? That's what our thought is. And so it says, maybe he is beginning to lose his friends. Hey, has that been my experience? I'm starting to lose that connection. Maybe they're long gone, but am I starting to lose that connection with friends and family? His business may suffer somewhat. He is worried. And is that my experience? That I'm starting to have problems at work. Now, if we're saying, no, that happened a long time ago, we might be type 3, type 4. But we're starting to see the real symptoms of alcoholism or addiction. Because if I have the ability to control, or I have the ability to choose not to do it, I'm not going to lose those things that matter to me. I'm going to stop, or I'm going to control before I lose them. But if I'm starting to lose them and I can't control it, or I keep picking it up again, that's a sign that I have this thing. So it says he is worried at times and is becoming aware that he cannot drink like other people. Again, what we're pointing to is the physical allergy, because normal people don't drink the way that I drink, or use the way in which I use. We begin to see that difference. Sometimes he drinks in the morning and throughout the day. Hey, am I one of those people that I get going first thing in the morning? And then once I do, it takes off. And it says to hold his nervousness in check. Now, there's 2 types of nervousness that we could be talking about. One is sometimes when we overdrink or overuse substances, we experience withdrawal symptoms. And so we drink in the morning, or we use in the morning to combat some of those withdrawal symptoms. But one of the things we can also be pointing to is, I don't know about you, but when I am separated from substances, when I'm separated from alcohol, when I'm separated from drugs, and I'm separated from God, I'm not okay. I'm feeling that nervousness in the depth of my soul. What am I trying to treat? That's what I'm trying to treat, that nervousness. So it could be treating the withdrawals. Another way to look at that, another way to read that, is treating that spiritual malady. It says he is remorseful after serious drinking bouts. So that emerging remorseful, and tells you he wants to stop, swearing off, saying, that's it, I'm never going to drink again. But when he gets over the spree, he begins to think once more how he can drink moderately next time. That thinking I can drink moderately next time, that's the mental obsession. And you can make a little note in your book if you're writing in your book. And what I want to share is, like, we speak of the cycle kind of quite a bit at this study, because it's a really helpful way to frame the hopelessness of what I've got going on. And so to mirror the cycle with what we've read with not husband number 2, drinker or addict or whatever, number two, we can start seeing the cycle. So what happens is, number 2, he goes on a spree, and he emerges remorseful, filled with that guilt, that shame, and that remorse. I hate myself. I'm a piece of garbage. I can't believe I did this. And I start to say, that's it. I want to stop. I don't want to do this again. And I can look in my life and I can say, if I had any of those experiences where I've said, that's it, I'm never going to do this again. And did that have any effect? And see, what happens is I'm thrust into what we refer to as a spiritual malady. Dr. Silkworth describes that as restless, irritable discontent, which is the doctor's polite way of describing it. But what I'm thrust into is that sense of separateness from God. I didn't know that's what it was. I'm thrust into that anxiety, that depression, that loneliness in the depth of my soul. My skin doesn't fit. I describe it as being a raw, exposed nerve ending. And for some ungodly reason, the wind is blowing and I am not okay. And that is when I'm suicidal. I always talk about, if you ask me how I'm doing, I'll tell you, happy to be here. Happy to be sober. I'll take 24 and pass it on, right? And I'm thrust in that nervousness. And when it talks about how we begin to think we can drink moderately next time, that's our mental obsession, unable to differentiate the true from the false. Because what is true for me? What is true is once I start, I don't have control. And as a result of not having control, I burn my life to the ground. I do things I don't want to do. I hurt people in ways I never wanted to hurt people. I destroy the lives of those around me. And what's the lie? This time I'll be different. This time I'll drink like a lady, or this time I'll smoke crack like a lady. You're getting a picture. I never did anything in my life like a lady, This time will be different. And I believe the lie, and off I go. And I take that first one. I get that sense of, ease and comfort, but that allergy kicks off and I go through a spree. And the spree can be it could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years. And then eventually that spree is stopped. I come to filled with remorse and regret. And I think I'm never going to do it again. But I'm stuck with me. And there's nothing that I can put between me and the pain that I experience in sobriety. And I get a thought. And that thought tells me this time will be different. And I go around and around and around. And so when it talks about these are the real earmarks of a real alcoholic, see, type 1 kind of looks like a heavy drinker. Type 2, we're seeing the real earmarks of alcoholism, of addiction, going through the cycle again and again and again. And here's the thing, maybe the consequences haven't hit him yet. Because it says perhaps he can still tend to business fairly well. He has by no means ruined everything. As we say amongst ourselves, he wants to stop. So the consequences haven't hit me yet. Maybe. But the reality is, if I have examples from my own life of this cycle, it's a cycle. It will continue. And in my experience, it will continue to get worse and get worse and get worse. So if I relate to drinker number 2, and my illness is untreated, I will become drinker number 3. And so I'll stop the share and then we'll pop over and see drinker number 3. And so drinker number 3, it says, this husband, bottom of 109, this husband has gone much further than husband number 2. So we see the progression of this illness. And it says, though once like number 2, he became worse. So we see those same symptoms, lack of control, lack of choice. We see that cycle. His friends have slipped away. So there's that progression of consequences. His home is a near wreck and he cannot hold a position, right? Consequences piling up. Maybe the doctor has been called in and the weary round of sanitariums and hospitals has begun. Now, when we see that word sanitarium, what we can do, we typically don't use that word much anymore. So let's switch out sanitarium and think treatment center, detox, sober living, right? When we talk about hospitals, it can be emergency rooms, it can be psych wards. Has that been my experience? Have I been in and out of those things? And when it talks about the doctor's been called in, maybe some of those things that I have tried have been therapy and counseling. Have I seen an addictions counselor? Have I seen a social worker? Have I seen things like that? There's nothing wrong with any of those things, but what we're going to see is that they do not work if I have this illness. So it started the round, right? The rounds of, sanitariums and hospitals have begun. So we see again that cycle. I go to the detox, the sober living, I go to the rehab, I go to the psych ward, and I think, that's it. I'm never going to do this again. And maybe I complete the treatment program, and I get out and I do it again, right? Sometimes we don't make it through the treatment program. Hey, has that been my experience? And if that's been my experience, I can be like, wait a minute, I might be number 3. And it says, he admits that he cannot drink like other people, but does not see why. And see, when we're looking at this chapter, 2 wives, right? It's to those who are affected by alcoholism and do not drink. When we see that, we are as baffled by our illness, and we have misunderstandings about our own illness. So of course, those who watch us and those who love us, of course, they have misunderstandings about us too. If I don't understand what's wrong with me and I have it and I experience, how could I expect my loved ones to? Now it says he clings to the notion that he will yet find a way to do so, to drink like other people. And I want to bounce this around again. Make a note, if you want to write in your book, make a note to see page 30. And let's pop over to page 30. And so we're in the chapter more about alcoholism. And what we're going to point to is that very first paragraph of page 30, where it says, most of us have been unwilling to admit that we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily, physical allergy, and mental obsession different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove that we could drink like other people, right? That's what it's talking about. On 110, we want to cling to the notion that we're going to be able to drink like them. And then it says the idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking. It's a great obsession of every abnormal drinker. I always say, if I'm controlling it, I'm not enjoying it. If I'm enjoying it, off we are to the races. There is not any control. And I always want to point out, it says the persistence of this illusion being pointing to the mental obsession, is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. See, if I'm relating to number 2, if I have this illness, number 3 and number 4 are inevitable. It is into the gates of insanity or death. I think I'm up to. I think it'll get bad, but it's not going to get that bad, right? But the reality is, if I have this, I cannot choose whether I'm an M2 or an F2. The illness will take me into. So let's pop back to page 110. Welcome, Carl. I'm glad you're here. We're on page 110. So it says, what we just read was, he clings to the notion that he will yet find a way to do so. He may have come to the point where he desperately wants to stop, but cannot. And see, that's the thing, is every time I said, I do not want to drink again, I meant it. I was not lying to you. I was not lying to me. I desperately wanted to stop. The wording I always used was turn this thing around. I didn't want to be who I was being. I didn't want to do what I wanted to do, what I was doing. I wanted to live another way, but I just couldn't. And it says his case presents additional questions which we shall try to answer for you. You know what's interesting? This line, you can be quite hopeful of a situation like this. See, this is not what I would expect, right? If this chapter is to the non-alcoholic, those who are affected by my illness, you might expect, type 1, they might not even be an alcoholic. Ain't no problem. It'll be good. No, I can be hopeful the more hopeless the alcoholic is. The more hopeless I am, the better. And the more that I see my hopelessness, the better. So number 2 might have a hard time being willing to do this thing, because hey, I'm not that bad. Look at all the stuff I still have. Now, the stuff I still have does not mean anything with alcoholism or addiction. The stuff I have and the stuff I lose are the consequences. But the more I lose and the more that I try different things and they don't work, the more I begin to really see the hopelessness of my dilemma. And the more hopeless I am, the more I'm willing to accept the hope that's on offer in this book and follow these directions. And then the more hopeful my family could be. Now, this is type 4. You may have a husband with whom you completely despair, absolutely hopeless. He has been placed in one institution or another, rehab, detox, and like long-term treatment, and it's not working. It says he is violent or appears definitely insane when drunk, and that's a sign of the allergy. It is also a sign of the deterioration of the body and mind as the effects of substances, but it's a sign that I'm not controlling the amount that I take. It says sometimes he drinks on the way home from the hospital. Have I gone to rehab and relapsed right after? Right? Yeah. Perhaps he's had delirium tremens, very serious and potentially fatal withdrawal symptoms. Doctors shake their heads and advise you to have him committed. Maybe you have been already obliged to put him away. And this was at a time where sanitariums, where people would be locked up for their alcoholism. And that's not to say that people are not locked up for their alcoholism or their addiction today. It'll look like things like jails. And it'll look like things like prison. And it'll look like things like long-term mental facilities. That's what it'll look like. So there are times we are locked up against our will. You know, if it's been formed, different places in the world have called different things, but you can be held against your will in a psychiatric facility if you're believed to be a danger to yourself or others. Those are examples of where we have, and maybe we've had that experience where we've been held against our will. Now it says this picture may not be as dark as it looks. Many of our husbands were just as far gone, yet they got well. The more hopeless, the better. And that's a theme that we're seeing. All right, so now what we're going to be given is these directions on what do I do? How do I handle? How do I help? How do I manage? Now, we don't want to manage or handle or control because that's none of our business. And actually, ironically, that's the struggle of the unrecovered codependent, the untreated Al-Anon. That is the struggle that I want to control, and I want to fix, and I want to save, and I want to put on my cape, and I only feel valuable and worthy when I'm fixing and saving. But what this is actually going to say, it's going to tell me to take a step back and let God be God. That is what the thrust of so many of these directions in Two Wives are going to be. So we're not going to try to control and fix and manage and change. And let's see what it says. Don't take my word for it. Let's read on. So it says, let's go back to husband number 1, hard drinker, might not even be an alcoholic. Oddly enough, he is often difficult to deal with. Isn't that interesting, right? He doesn't have a problem. He doesn't need help. Get off my back. Don't tell me what to do. He enjoys drinking. It stirs his imagination. His friends feel closer over a highball. Perhaps you enjoy drinking with him yourself when he doesn't go too far. You have passed happy evenings together, chatting and drinking before your fire. Perhaps you both like parties, which would be dull without liquor. We've enjoyed such evenings ourselves. We've had a good time. We know all about liquor as a social lubricant, which is not something to casually bring up in conversation. If you're like, oh, would you like, would you care for a social lubricant? That's weird. That is weird. You will be judged. Some of us, but not all of us. See, what we're talking about too, when it says some of us, but not all of us, is when this book was published, alcohol was just made legal in the United States a couple of years earlier. And so that, was kind of a contentious hot button issue for people. So what they're trying to say is, hey, we're staying on the fence. We're not picking a side of whether it should be legal or not. We're just saying some of us do think it's got its advantages when reasonably used. And I can look at my experience. Have I ever reasonably used it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And see, on page 111, what we're given is, and man, like this is why I love the chapter Two Wives. And I know that's kind of a weird and controversial thing to say. What we're going to be given is the 4 principles of success. And then we're going to see 2 additional principles to tie it in. So 6 principles of success. And I want you to know that these principles have become so important in my life. And if I do a good job at managing time, which is not something I often do, what I will do is I will share my experience with how life-saving these principles have been. And see, keep in mind, these are principles. How do I approach a human being who is not open to change, who does not want to change, who does not want my advice, who does not want my suggestions? How do I approach them? And how do I approach them with the lens of what will be most helpful? Because keep in mind, that is the lens of two wives. How can we be most helpful to the person who is suffering from this illness? So the first principle of success, this is principle one, is that you should never be angry. Now that's a tall order, right? That's a tall order. Now I oftentimes will read this and be like, yeah, spouse, partner, never be angry. But I got some bad news. I got some bad news. If I am the one reading this book, I am the one with the tools. And if I am the one with the tools, it is my responsibility to use them. And even though I be the quote unquote husband, these principles apply to me as the quote unquote husband, just as much as the quote unquote wife. So the person with the illness, just as much as the untreated codependent. The first principle is that you should never be angry. Now, keep in mind, we went over what we do with resentments, how we treat resentments. I can't overcome anger on my own. I have no power or control over anger. So what do you mean I should never be angry? Of course, anger will come. But at this point in the book, we have already been given direction on what to do if we are angry. And if you're new to this study, you're like, okay, wait, what's the direction? What do I do if I'm angry? The process of inventory, right? I go through the process of going through the resentment columns. I inventory it. And I can inventory it pen to paper like I would in a 4-step or I would in my evening review. Or I can practice the 10-step directions. Now, the 10-step directions, it's to watch, it's to pray. So if I feel anger, I see anger coming up, the first thing I do is I pray. And then I discuss it with somebody. Now, I'm not going to call somebody and be like, I hate so-and-so. So-and-so is the worst. How do I talk it out with people? And practically, this is how I do 10 steps, is I talk it through the resentment columns. I share I'm resentful at this person or this situation. Here's why. This is what it affects. Sometimes I'll even say the prayer on the phone out loud with the person that I'm calling or on a voice memo or however I do it. And then I find my mistakes. Where have I done these things? Where did I make a decision based on self, which later put me in a position to be hurt? Where was I selfish? Where was I dishonest? Where was I self-seeking? And where was I frightened? And then once I've done that and I've shared that with another person, if an amends is due, I go make it. And if not, and either way, once I've made it, or if there's not one due, I turn my thoughts to someone I can help. So it's going to tell me never be angry, but that never be angry doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens around these directions on what to do with resentment. And also, the lens is how can I be most helpful to those who are suffering from this illness? Have you ever received anger, and that anger, that like just yelling, that shouting, has that ever led to permanent change? It hasn't for me. You might get me to do something for a little while because I want the yelling to stop, but I'm going to be hurt. I'm going to be bitter. I'm going to be resentful. It doesn't work. And I don't know about you. Maybe y'all are more spiritually open and minded. But if you tell me I have to do something and you do it to me mean, absolutely not. I'm going to go do the opposite, right? I'm resistant to that. Anger does not help. And anger does not help because we're dealing with somebody. If they have alcoholism, they do not have the ability to choose whether they're drinking or not. Anger does not help. I actually didn't think I was going to talk about it at this point in the study. I was going to kind of wrap up with it, but welcome. I'm glad you're here. We're on page 111. Last spring, I sat with my uncle for 9 days as he passed away in the hospital. And his passing was not a pleasant passing. It was not an easy passing. It was horrific. Those 9 days were awful, absolutely awful. He was in absolute pain, physical pain because of what the cancer had done. And he was also experiencing paranoia and delusions. And so he would fight the pain medication. And here's a human being, through no fault of his own, was going through an incredibly difficult time. and he was suffering, and he didn't need to suffer in the way that he was suffering if only he would take the medication. And so what would I want to do on my own power of will? I might want to get mad. Might want to get pissed off. Take the pills. It wasn't pills. He couldn't swallow. Take the painkiller. I just don't want to use the specific names in case people, but take the painkiller. Take the painkiller. And he wouldn't take it. He didn't want to die. And he was scared that he was being poisoned. Now here's a man who is scared, who is frightened, who is confused. Am I going to help if I show up with anger? Is that going to help him? It's going to make it worse. Just like if I have this illness, I don't have the ability to choose whether I'm going to pick up or not. So anger doesn't help. And it says, even though even though your husband becomes unbearable and you have to leave him temporarily. See, it's saying go. If you can go, dude, go. But this chapter is for those that aren't able to go. This chapter is for those who are as bound to the alcoholic as the alcoholic is to alcohol, as the addict is to drugs. So if you have to leave him temporarily, if you can, go without rancor. That means bitterness and resentment. Go without anger. Leave. Separate yourself if you need to, but don't do it out of anger. It says patience and good temper are most necessary. I can't get to patience and good temperament on my own power. I can't. I need God. I need God. And as we're going through that, the process in the hospital with my uncle, what was happening is because of the pain and because just how awful it was. Most nights what would happen is every 20 minutes he would come to and he would scream. And he couldn't really scream because his voice was so hoarse and was so gone. But every 20 minutes I would get woken up with help, 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 help me, every 20 minutes. And when it says patience and good temper are most necessary, that's not something I can do on my own. I can't show up to that on my own. But I was able to show up to that. Now I'm just a fall down failure of a drunk. I'm a crackhead that's pissing my pants behind a dumpster. That's who I am. But I was able to show up with unconditional love and a level of patience that is not my own. And how did I do that? These steps, this way of life. I don't mess around with the daily disciplines. I don't miss daily prayer. I don't miss daily meditation. I don't miss daily evening review. I don't miss those things. And that work to get connected with power greater than myself, so that power could work through me. And it's not my patience, it's God's patience could work through me. That's how. I don't do it. I get me out of the way. God does it. So this is the second principle of success. It says our next thought is you should never tell him what he must do about his drinking. That's not to say we can't set boundaries. That's not to say we can't communicate our feelings. But we never tell him what he must do. Just kind of talking about my uncle again, it would do no good because he would scream for help and the nurses would come and they would come with the medication. And he would be scared and he would say no. He would say no. And if I were to, and the nurses absolutely wouldn't, because we don't force people to do things against their will. And we don't do that with alcoholics either, or addicts either. But it would have created just as much, if not more, distress if he was held down and forced to have that medication. Never tell him what he must do. And it says if he gets the idea that you are a nag or a killjoy, your chance of accomplishing anything useful may be zero. He will use this as an excuse to drink more. And he will tell you he is misunderstood. This may lead to some lonely evenings for you. He may seek someone else to console him, not always another man. And that's a hard read. But what I want to point out is that is the level of selfishness that I have. That if you kind of come at me, you don't understand, I'm going to hurt you and I can't even see how I hurt you. But if we pop over to page 90 and 91, we're bouncing around this thing. Page 90 and 91, we're going to see how these are the exact same directions that we were given in the chapter Working with Others. See, the very bottom paragraph of page 90, it says, if he does not want to see you, never force yourself upon him. I can't force sobriety on it. And I am codependent. I qualify for Al-Anon. I've done actually some Al-Anon and some Al-Anon work. I am codependent. I have tried. I have tried to force sobriety and recovery on people. It does not work. And it says neither should the family hysterically plead with him to do anything, nor should they tell him much about you. And it talks about how you should wait for the end of his next drinking bout, right? Wait for that place of hopelessness, right? Where they come to. And it says you might place this book where he can see it in the interval. Here, no specific rule can be given. The family must decide these things, but urge them not to be over anxious, for that might spoil matters. The more that I'm pushed, the more resistant I become. And it says usually the family should not try to tell your story. When possible, avoid meeting a man through his family. Approach through a doctor or an institution is a better bet. And so let's pop back over to 111. See, we were speaking last time on page 18, and we're going to 111. I'm just going to quickly talk about page 18, where it's like, I have my walls up with my family, those closest to me more than anyone else. Nagging does not work. And again, anger has not led to any permanent change in my life. Nagging has not led to any permanent change in my life. And this is the third principle of success. It's on the third full paragraph on page 111. I know I bounce this around a lot. I appreciate your patience with me. So it says, be determined. This is the third principle. Be determined that your husband's drinking is not going to spoil your relations with your children or your friends. Maintain healthy connections outside of that relationship. That's what the direction is. And again, to tie it back to that situation that I had with my uncle, I could not leave the room for very long because he needed my help that much. And so I couldn't take phone calls because when people are in sort of some of those late stages of dying, noise and like stimulation sort of exacerbates the hallucinations. And so I couldn't take phone calls. But I would text with my sponsees. And I'd have sponsees reaching out and saying, Paige, I need to do a 10-step call. And I'd say, absolutely, what I need you to do is I need you to text it to me. It's maybe not the perfect way that you would expect, but it works, right? I need to maintain those relationships with other people. And on page 102, we don't have to pop over to 102, but on page 102, it talks about as an alcoholic, I withdraw from society. Well, that's what those who are affected by us also do. See, as I withdraw from society, as I drink or use drugs, my family withdraws from society as they try to control and fix me. And I need to be a part of this world, and that's what I'm called to do. And it says, they need your companionship and your help. It is possible to have, and this is important, it is possible to have a full and useful life, even though your husband continues to drink. We're going to bounce around again. Make a little note in your book, page 97. And real quick, we're going to pop over to 97. And see, that's the thing. With two wives, it's often we don't like the suggestions, but we don't see that they're matched and mirrored at different parts of the book. It's just the title, Two Wives, throws us off. Don't tell me what to do, that sort of thing, right? The bottom paragraph, full paragraph 97, where it says, though an alcoholic does not respond, there is no reason why you should neglect his family. You should continue to be friendly to them. So in this case, the alcoholic hasn't responded, right? That's what we're talking about. Alcoholics still drinking, offer this way of life to the family. The family should be offered your way of life. What is the way of life? These 12 steps. That's what this way of life is, taken out of this book. Should they accept and practice spiritual principles, that means work the steps, there is a much better chance that the head of the family will recover. And that's a little foreshadowing to one of these principles of success. Spoilers, got to work the steps. Can't escape that one. And it says, even though he continues to drink, the family will find life more bearable. So we see that on page 111, and we see that on page 97. So going back to page 111, thank you for indulging me, guys. It talks about, so again, it is possible to have a full and useful life, even though your husband continues to drink. We know women who are unafraid and even happy under these conditions. Again, in working with others, I'm not going to bounce this around that hard. That'd be a little too hard to bounce. We'd be going bounce around every sentence. But that's the thing. It talks about how in working with others, that my sobriety is not contingent upon my relationship with people. It is contingent upon my relationship with God. My emotional sobriety is not contingent upon my relationship with people. It is contingent upon my relationship with God. And this is the fourth principle of success. So right here, it says, do not set your heart on reforming your husband. You may be unable to do so no matter how hard you try. To summarize that fourth principle of success, we leave the results in God's hands. And that's what I had to do. If I was fixated on my uncle taking that medication when and how I thought he would so he wouldn't suffer, that would have just prolonged both of the suffering. But if I could meet people where they're at and accept where they're at and leave the results of things that I don't have control over anyways in God's hands. See, in step 3, I get fired from the management position of my life. If my life's unmanageable by me, anyone else's is unmanageable by me too. I think I'll do better with yours than I will mine, but my track record does not prove that. So these are those 4 principles of success. And I share that with a situation with my uncle, because these principles apply in all these different ways that I wouldn't have thought. And I would have missed them if I was diverted by the beauty of the forest of this chapter, by the ugliness of some of its trees, some of the title or some of that. These are practical and they work with people who are not open to a suggestion. They work with people who need to have their own experience. I'm getting ahead of myself. There's 2 more suggestions, but we're going to read them in a sec. So it says, we know these suggestions are sometimes difficult to follow. Yeah, we hear you. This is a tall order. Man, I need the power of God to even approach these things. It says, but you will save many a heartbreak if you can succeed in observing them. Your husband may come to appreciate your reasonableness and patience. Oftentimes I'll have sponsees that'll come to me and say, you're going to be mad. And I don't get mad, because anger, it doesn't work. I meet people where we're at and we give them the tools. That's what we do. And it says, this may lay the groundwork for a friendly talk about his alcoholic problem. Try to have him bring up the subject himself. Be sure you are not critical during such a discussion. It says, attempt to put yourself in his place. And I love that, because we're not going to pop over there, but on page 90, that's what it tells me to do with the new prospect. And the theme of that is seeking to understand rather than to be understood. And when I'm showing up with people that I want to fix, control, and change, I get stuck in being, they need to hear me. Maybe what I need to do is understand what's going on for them. And it says, let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical. And that theme of helpful is one that we see throughout these later chapters. To be helpful, not to fix, manage, control, helpful. That's it. So it says, when a discussion does arise, you might suggest that he read this book. And if you go to some meetings, sometimes you'll hear of a page 112 meeting. And it's like, turn to page 112 and have him follow the directions. 112, read this book. Oh, and there's another one where you turn to another page and the first 3 words are more than once, and it's like, read this book more than once. That's all we got to do. And it says, or at least the chapter on alcoholism. If you're not sure what chapter that is, that's the chapter more about alcoholism. So have him read this book. And it says, tell him you have been worried, though perhaps needlessly. Now, keep in mind, we're doing a bit of a soft sell, because if I'm worried about somebody enough to buy this and to read it myself, you know what I mean? But I am worried. But it says, though perhaps needlessly, you think he ought to know the subject better, as everyone should have a clear understanding of the risk he takes if he drinks too much. Show him you have confidence in his power to stop or moderate. Say that you don't want to be a wet blanket, that you only want him to take care of his health. Thus, you may succeed in interesting him in alcoholism. And that's going to be the 5th principle. But to summarize that 5th principle, it's giving them the dignity of their own experience. That's what we're doing. We're letting them have their own experience. Now, if you are speaking with your partner or your spouse, or a loved one, don't tell them that you're giving them the dignity of their experience. Don't say, sweetie, I will give you the right to be wrong. That does not go over well. But that's what we're doing, because keep in mind, we're talking about number one. One of two things might happen. One, they might be able to get it under control. They might be good. And if not, they've crossed things off the list, right? You know, when I'm working with somebody and they're like, I don't want to do steps, cool. Don't do steps, try other things, go try other things, you know? Because one of two things might happen. One, those other things might work if I don't have this illness. But if I have this illness, I've checked things off the box, checked boxes off that do not work. And I've grown in my hopelessness. And only here is that a good thing. And so it says, so yeah, show him that you have confidence and power to moderate. So you don't want to be a wet blanket. You only wanted to take care of his health. Thus, you may succeed in interesting him in alcoholism. He probably has several alcoholics among his own acquaintances. You might suggest that you both take an interest in them. Drinkers like to help other drinkers. Isn't that true? You know, oftentimes I work with newcomers or responsees, and you know, one of the things that's really motivating them is, I want to help others. There is something in us, despite our selfishness and our self-centeredness. We do want to help people like us. We really do. And it says your husband may be willing to talk with one of them. And we're getting in these suggestions, we're starting to see what that sixth principle of success is. But it ties in with this next paragraph. So it says, if this kind of approach does not catch your husband's interest, it may be best to drop the subject. But after a friendly talk, your husband will usually revive the topic himself. This may take patient waiting, but it will be worth it. Meanwhile, you might try to help the wife of another serious drinker. If you act upon these principles, your husband may stop or moderate. So the sixth principle of success, how am I going to help the wife of another serious drinker? What help do they need? Well, what do I got to do? I got to work these steps. So I got some bad news. Six principles of success is work these steps. I know I alluded to it earlier. I got to work these steps. I got to let God's light shine. I got to stop trying to fix, manage, and control that person in my life who is not open and go help someone who is. That's what I got to go do. And if I follow these principles, right? Principle 1, never be angry. Principle 2, never tell him what he must do. Principle 3, continue to have healthy relationships with others. Principle 4, let go of the outcome. Principle 5, give them the dignity of their own experience. And principle 6, go work my own kick-ass program. That was, yeah, principles of success. Oh, 2 wives. That stuff's pretty rad. We got a couple minutes left, so I'm hoping we can pop in and get some of the directions on what to do for husband number 2, number 3. We might go a couple minutes over. Maybe not. We'll just see what happens. I'll let go of the outcome. That's one of the principles of success. So I should follow it. You invited me. Steve's told me I could do this. All right. Suppose, however, your husband fits the description of number 2. Now, keep in mind, number 2, real earmarks of the alcoholic, going through the cycle. Now, the consequences aren't as heavy as 3 and 4, but we're seeing that lack of control, and we're seeing that lack of choice, the physical allergy, that mental obsession. It says the same principles which apply to husband number 1 should be practiced. Oh, man, I can't escape those principles. Here they are. Still got to work on my own set of steps, right? And it says, but after his next binge, ask him if he would really like to get over drinking for good. Do not ask that he do it for you or anyone else. Just, would he like to? And see, that question we saw on page 58 in how it works. Do you want what we have, and are you willing to go to any lengths to get it? We saw it on page 90, again, where we're asking, or the family member is asking that new man, like, do they want to quit for good, and are they willing to go to any extreme to do so? We see it in here on 112. We'll see it in some of the later chapters. We also seen it asked on page 42. So again, this is a theme that we see, asking, do you want to quit? And are you willing to go to any lengths? that theme. And it says, yeah, for good, not just for today, right? It talks earlier on in the book, if we are to quit drinking, there must be no reservation of any time, nor any lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol. If I got reservations, we are on a tangent I didn't expect, but if I got reservations, what I always tell people is that is okay. Let's take them to prayer. Let's take them to God, right? Yeah, I got to work this thing on a daily basis. See, it says faith has to work in and through me 24 hours a day or I perish. I got to work this on a daily basis, but I don't got to white knuckle. Just hold on. Don't pick up, one day at a time. And thank God for that. So it says, do not ask that he do it for you or anyone else, just would he like to. The chances are that he would. Show him your copy of this book. Tell him what you have found about alcoholism. Show him that as alcoholics, the writers of this book understand. And this is interesting. It says, tell him some of the interesting stories you have read. See, what I do is when I come to the rooms, when I come to meetings, I share my story. I share my experience, strength, and hope. The reason we have the stories in the back of the book is because I might only have a copy of this book and not have the full directions or not have the luxury of how to get well, but I have the directions. Like I might not have meetings that I get to go to. You know what I'm saying? This book went out in 1939. Not everywhere in the world got a book. But if I had a book, from this book in these directions, I might start a meeting. And so we recover by hearing that I'm not alone, that I drank and used like you. I felt and I went through what you went through. And if I am a family member and I don't have the illness in the same manifestation, I might not be able to carry this message. But it's connecting with those who have had this experience. And it says, and I think what we'll stop is when we get to husband number 3, just, yeah, thank you so much for coming. I'm so glad you're here. Yeah, well, come back next week, or don't, no pressure. You do you. we're in the don't be codependent section. So it says, if you think you will be shy of a spiritual remedy, ask him to look at the chapter on alcoholism. Again, if I'm resistant to the spiritual solution, I need to understand the hopelessness of my dilemma. And it's more about alcoholism that drives home that hopelessness. Perhaps he will be interested enough to continue. If he is enthusiastic, keep in mind, I always say this, enthusiasm. Enthusiastic, it's Greek in origin, and essentially what it means is to be filled with God's Spirit. And it says, if he's enthusiastic, your cooperation will mean a great deal. If he is lukewarm or thinks he is not an alcoholic, we suggest you leave him alone. Avoid urging him to follow our program. The seed has been planted in his mind. And keep in mind, whenever we plant a seed has everything that it needs to grow on its own. Everything it needs is already in the seed. And the seed's early growth happens underground, where I can't see it. So just because I don't see immediate results does not mean something is not working. He knows that thousands of men, much like himself, have recovered. There's that word again, that theme, recovered. And it does say, but don't remind him of this after he's been drinking, for he may be angry. Discernment, pick our timing, And it says sooner or later, you're likely to find him reading this book once more. Wait until repeated stumblings, right? We go through the cycle and we experience that hopelessness, convinces him he must act. For the more you hurry him, the more his recovery may be delayed. The more I pressure or am pressured, the more resistant I am to it. So we're a little over time. So we'll stop and we'll pick up with number 3. How do we help number 3 next week? And so I want to thank you guys for joining and for being here. It is really a privilege for me. So thank you.